API Intersection podcast listeners are invited to sign up for Stoplight and save up to $650. Use the code INTERSECTION10 to get 10% off a new subscription to Stoplight Platform Starter or Pro. Take a look at this episode's description for more details.
I'm Jason Harmon, and this is API Intersection, where you'll get insights from experienced API practitioners to learn best practices on things like API design, governance, identity, auth, versioning, and more. Welcome back to API Intersection. As always, I'm your host, Jason Harmon, CTO of Stoplight. And today we have a guest with an interesting kind of take on testing around APIs and sort of automation in general, Mr. Alex Chernyak from ZAPTEST. Did I say your name right, Alex? I forgot to ask before.
Thank you.
So Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you guys do at ZAPTEST.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me. I'm a founder and CEO of ZAPTEST. I have experience of over 20 years. We started as a delivery team of once upon a time famous Mercury Interactive, then merged with Hewlett-Packard as partners, and developed ourselves as a standalone technology. Basically, we've been one of the pioneers of test automation industry in general. Today, we partner with Gartner, and I contribute knowledge and experience with Forbes Technology Council. You can find my articles online. Our main mission is software automation, where we merge two industries together, test automation and the RPA, robotic process automation, and merging the DevOps with BizOps pretty much. And our technology drives that to change and disrupt market in terms of how the test automation and the general RPA and software automation being delivered today.
Cool. So as I've said on here before, I love finding people with contrarian views. It's just anybody that's doing something different. I want to know why, where you're coming from. And I think in kind of reading up on some of the stuff you'd written in Forbes, things that you guys had published on ZAPTEST, I noticed that you had this sort of preference for like center of excellence, which for, our guests on the podcast, that's unusual. So I guess I'm curious to hear more. And maybe before you get too far with that, I'm also curious, are you working with a lot of large companies as your customers, or do you kind of have smaller companies too?
Predominantly large companies. We grew up in the industry. We've been brought to the industry as a SWAT team to deliver solution to the large enterprises. In my career, I've been to nearly all 500 Fortune worldwide, flying every week somewhere else. And I know large enterprises personally as a professional, and I like large enterprises, and I talk to a lot of executives on a daily basis from different group of the mid to large enterprises, and I understand the pain points. And to your question, though, the reason why we advocate, and I'm a big fan of Center of Excellence, is because it optimizes processes and drives automation faster, predominantly in the large enterprises.
So the typical thing that folks will point to from like the SOA era is that center of excellences tended to become organizational bottlenecks because you had, sort of too much authority centralized in things like, sort of design reviews and stuff. So I'm just curious, in your experience, have you seen that COEs do actually sort of impact delivery? And if not, then kind of how are you doing it?
A good question. I'm a big fan of hybrid models. I mean, we cannot win by doing the traditional way. If something didn't work in the past, it has to be changed, but not changed tremendously. It has to be modified from what worked in the past. So I agree with the fact that it cannot be taken as it used to be, because the technology is different, the work ethic is different, the delivery process is different as well. But the fundamentals that COE brings to enterprise remains the same. Unification of artifacts and the processes. And this is what optimizes and saves cost at the end of the day. Makes sense? Saves time and money pretty much. Like examples might be choice of technology. It's hiring process, product and process enablement, change management, and so far and so on. I agree with the fact that there may be deviation per delivery schedule per different groups or departments, but still the authority and knowledge should remain centralized, because that's what drives faster altogether collaboration and productivity.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think people get caught up in labels rather than
I can break it down. Again,
It's okay. I mean, I was just having fun with it because I'm like, that's an unusual take. But what's funny is like by your description is like have some centralized understanding of what your shared capabilities are, what your standards are, all of that stuff. I think for folks who say that this sort of like enablement approach should be the thing, they'll say the same things, right? Like you should have at least a small team that's defining those common and sort of standardized things. The sort of enablement approach probably comes more in when it's like review time, right? Time to review the design. But I'll say this. I don't think that's what you guys are great at anyways. It's not, it was just an interesting tidbit that I saw. So certainly more interested to kind of learn from you around sort of API testing. I'll just kind of say broadly. And I guess, are there any sort of clear takeaways from you in 20 plus years of doing this on how folks should approach sort of API testing?
Well, API testing has to take place, and more organized, cheaper it becomes, right? So, of course, there will be a definition of what needs to be tested, prioritization. There's a whole fundamentals and the science around that. Choice of technology that needs to be used. The tests should be automated by far. I mean, the manual testing today, it's like walking versus driving. So in the today cross-platform,
especially with
exactly.
APIs,
And
right? Where like you have this very definable input output. It's not like UX testing or something where it's super
absolutely
ambiguous.
And today, any development leader, when budgeting for the development process, absolutely must budget for automation of testing. Because with today cross-platform, cross-environment demand on the market, you cannot win development by manual testing. No matter what you do, UI testing, API testing, acceptance. Makes sense.
Yeah, speaking of mobile, I noticed it seemed like you all did a lot with kind of sort of deploying tests on multiple platforms and that sort of thing. So for me, it raises this question, like you mentioned acceptance testing, and in sort of the API world, a lot of times it's like put your sort of test harness around the API and test that itself. But it seems like y'all are also running tests through sort of mobile or web interfaces against the API. Is that right?
Well, you can do testing on the different platforms. What comes to mobile, we predominantly with ZAPTEST using it through UI automation. But we don't,
Okay.
in our technology, we like to hybrid API and UI together in the same script. You can do different steps. And we advocate that as well, because even though API is a skeleton of any software, and if you don't have a well-established API, software won't run fast no matter how pretty it looks. You still have a human acceptance layer, which is a UI, because the software developed predominantly still today, decision done by the humans in most of the part, and the software need to be handled by human. So the UI layer plays, in some cases, more or less important phase, right, in testing. So, yeah, and this is how we do mobile through UI automation. But within our software, due to the object recognition algorithm that we enriched, it's absolutely technology agnostic what we can automate. So it benefits API testing in this regard.
Very cool. I guess zooming out a little bit on kind of this, testing automation kind of stuff, like what are the trends that you kind of see, how are things changing specifically around kind of APIs over this, recent couple of years?
Well, for most of the part, API is pretty steady. I mean, as far as testing goes, there is no much innovate. We're trying to make it more user friendly in regards to build all the gadgets, all the correlation validation functionalities in the tool that makes the development job and testing job easier this way. As far as the management, organizational aspects, reporting modules, and so far and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. It's certainly, I know we're looking at a lot of that sort of stuff too, that it's like there's not that many people with lots of API expertise out there. And so a lot of folks looking for sort of tooling around this stuff, they don't exactly know what to do. So you kind of, you need to lead them to water, make it a little bit easier to understand and learn. As now everyone's building some kind of API or microservice. You just have a lot of folks that have a lot to learn is what it seems like to me. It sounds like that's what
Absolutely,
you're saying too.
Yes. I mean, definitely API testing and API automation requires more knowledge and experience in the development predominantly, and understanding the whole science of development versus UI testing. It's more intuitive, and the business analyst type of personnel can acquire that, and when it comes to automation, it's more intuitive. But API testing definitely requires knowledge. But the way you can expedite it by having very convenient tools. That's what we focus on at ZAP to make a development life easier.
Yeah, makes sense. Another bit from kind of looking through things that you kind of written and talked about, it seems like you're big advocate for kind of API first. And, we sort of see this language coming out all over the place, certainly from Gartner too. So I'm curious, like, how does this sort of, first of all, API first is kind of like microservice. Somebody made up a word and now we have to figure out what the hell it means, right? But I guess from your perspective, how do you see that sort of makes testing and automation
Absolutely.
better?
As I mentioned, I'm partner with Gartner's and Gartner, and I work with Gartner's analysts constantly. So API first, it's one of the movements that Gartner is pushing this year. And I, as a professional, I agree with that because automation is the future. And for better or worse, we see it's taken place, especially pandemic was a stress test for humanity to understand that we need to do more with less. And the only way to achieve it is to automate more. Since the API is a skeleton and foundation of any software development, this is the most robust way to integrate systems together. And once you build in the automation overall, when you have to combine multiple systems for different purposes from AI, IoT, you name it, conventional development and what's not, you would like probably to go through APIs to integrate them even more than you will do through UI. As an idea, it's great, and I totally support it. However, any movement, especially in the corporate world, adopted in the slow pace. Everyone conservative and definitely want to test it before they run with that. So they're walking first, and it's still going to be a while, I may say a couple of years, until industry solidify their approach to that and comprehension. Still, when we integrate systems together for either testing or RPA, we use a combination of UI and API. I would say API with UI, because for various reasons, especially for change management, the larger corporation, more departments it has, and the different department owns particular systems that they don't communicate truly with each other for various reasons, and therefore you, as an automation team, you have to deliver faster, so you do use some UI steps to overcome certain integration.
Yeah. I'm going to admit one thing now is that I think probably from doing API design for a long time and working with lots of different sort of teams, there are certain words that for me have no meaning anymore, such as metadata. Right? Metadata is a meaningless word. It could mean anything you want, right? And honestly, I feel like automation is a little bit the same. But I noted that y'all do So I'm trying to pick
Sure.
apart what automation means in your world. We've already established testing. That's good. And you mentioned this kind of robotic process stuff. I guess I'm curious on like business process automation seems like a thing that y'all are doing too. And I'm curious, how have APIs kind of changed that world in the last few
All right.
years?
So first of all, I agree with you as far as the words. Automation being overly abused and it's diluting the meaning. In my particular opinion, RPA, it's also not necessarily explains what it's supposed to do, and it's very confusing for a lot of even technical professional. RPA stands, first of all, for robotic process automation. RPA, it's an old term, but still used in the industry, and we use it as well for convenience sake. It's a way to automate non-technical processes, or the business operation processes. Technical process automation, right? Business process automation, exactly as you said. But RPA being adopted as a reference, so this is why we still use it. Basically, business process automation is a similar process to testing automation, but oriented to the business processes. Different goals. In the test automation, you have a goal for validation, particular aspects in the technology. In the RPA, in the business process automation, you focus on the processing of the repeatable processes of automated decision making, input output, basically replacing human being in front of the digital interface, in front of the screen.
What would a good example of this look like?
Account payable, receivable, right? You have a lot of paperwork where you have to open one PDF, read it as a human, values, copy, paste it into the Salesforce, for example, right? Or any other CRM system. And that tedious process, it relies on you as a human for decision making. So what RPA does is basically we build bots that does the same thing, that replicates it. It automatically opens PDF, finds the value you needed, copy it, opens this CRM system interface, pastes it there, either through user interface or through APIs. And do it through APIs much faster, more robust, because UI rely on object recognition. It's rely on different design of the user interface that may change. Different UI technologies handle it differently, even though we say that we're most robust UI animation on the market. Still, I believe that API has a more solid approach to that.
It's interesting as you were describing that, and thank you for walking me through it. I think it is a big enterprise older term that I'm just not that familiar with, so that helps. I feel like over the last year or so, really year or two, there's been a lot of this focus on like how APIs have sort of responded to the pandemic, and a lot of this like remote work and just kind of like less hands on deck sometimes, that sort of thing, has seemed to put a lot of emphasis around APIs. And it occurred to me as you're describing this, that this sort of business process automation type stuff must have really picked up a lot recently in response.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry as far as the business process automation. It's a future of corporate world, pretty much, if you will. For various reasons, it takes a slower pace, enablement, knowledge, political aspects of replacing the human, the workers versus machines, right? But for better or worse, industry moving toward it, because it's a competitive market. You have to deliver more for less, and that's what everybody working on.
Yeah, very interesting. I guess across the different sort of like you've kind of got the testing and automation stuff, the business process automation, and your explanation is one of the better ones I've heard on why those things have commonalities. It makes more sense to me now. What other kind of, there are other sort of aspects that you guys do?
We do performance automation. So performance testing and all load scalability.
That's right. Yeah, I saw you introduced That's your newest thing, kind of load testing stuff, right?
I mean, we've been there for as long as we've been in the testing business. We've always been doing the performance testing. I'm a load runner certified instructor. I used to fly around the world and teach corporations how to do performance testing. Right. Yeah. So performance testing also, it's a big aspect of overall testing process and overall automation. Even though performance automation applies more for testing purposes rather than these apps, because this is where we need to test and stress system to validate different aspects of the sustainability. So end-to-end transaction response time, the system components, how they can handle particular loads per peak, and so far and so on. That's a science of its own. Yeah, and speaking of API, we big advocates of API-driven performance testing. So we actually established the gap in the process that's been on the market for decades, where functional API testing had to be done differently or scripted differently than the performance scripts. And it's usually was making the teams doubling the efforts, because in many cases you can leverage the same functional script that will be part of your virtual user groups and the performance scenario. So at ZAP, we basically, you can leverage same API script that you created for functional automation and run it as is into performance test scenario. That saves a lot of time and makes your life much easier. And it's also it brings it closer two main phases of testing process in general: the functional testing and the performance testing.
Yeah, it's been my experience, and maybe it's just the places I've been and people I've talked to that like load and performance testing, especially on APIs. For me, it's like plain as day. It's simple. It's clear cut. It's relatively easy, but it's the thing that people do the least because they have some like imagined complexity, or like this is going to be really hard and we're not going to get any confidence from the results. And I'm curious, do you see this kind of like resistance to investing in that sort of stuff?
I do, and you're absolutely right. Teams adapting performance testing lesser than they do functional testing, and exactly as you said, I mean, it's a lack of knowledge, lack of flexible technology on the market that easily can be accessed. Because historically, performance testing technology more costlier than the functional testing technology, and the reason for that, because you have to have multiple threads that mimic in the different virtual users, and that's one aspect, technological aspect, what tools we're going to use, right? Another aspect, it's knowledge in the process aspect. So how would you do performance testing? Because it's a pretty complex industry. You need to understand the different ways of what you need. Planning takes a huge time, because and it's a group team. Every time I was teaching performance testing, I said, make friends with all the decision makers, all the components admins, take everybody for a group lunch, and then we can start performance testing, right? Because it's a lot of planning involved, and the communication and the collaboration with different components, administration groups that needs to inject the metrics. They have to read with your results and optimize their components. Then you'd run again, and so far and so on. So this is why at ZAP we're offering also a model of software plus services, where we offer you complimentary full-time certified expert that enables your team and work alongside with your team to educate you on different aspects of test automation, either testing or RPA or functional performance testing, but predominantly performance testing as far as what you need to plan and how you need to establish and even sit down and script with you alone. Also on the other side, as far as the performance testing, you don't need it every day. If the functional testing, it's a daily involvement. It's like if you start it, you better continue doing it, because otherwise it will be obsolete, all the investment. With the performance testing, you can do it periodically. So usually you can do it per build, per particular event that happened within your software. It's maybe like quarterly and what's not. The phases are usually shorter, but they're more intense because you need to prepare script. You need to have all the business analysts, system admins, everybody on the standby and available to you once you do that. And of course, you have to create scripts and you have to prepare scenarios and make sure that all the components and environments place. And sometimes it's maybe even the worldwide and the globally, depends where user groups might be, right? Depends on your distribution. Right.
Yeah. All right. So I always have to be mindful when we have guests who cover a lot of different topics, and it's a broad ranging thing. And, you guys are smart. You tell us all the right things to do. But sometimes, I'm empathetic to like smaller organizations or maybe companies that aren't doing any of this stuff well. And they're thinking, that's one's overwhelming. It's just too much. So if you, Alex, today had to go start your small company and invest in sort of automation, where do you think that you would go first relative to kind of API development?
Well, it's a good question. So first of all, you need to think about the technology, what you're going to employ. Again, I would suggest everyone against doing any testing manually or planning doing testing manually. No matter how small project it is, the cost of failure today on the market is huge. You can fall only once, and the market is going to give up on you. So before you step out, I would highly recommend to have a very well tested software. And for that, we offer in ZAPTEST free edition. So any startup, any individual that would like to learn testing and test automation can download it every day, anytime. We have a well-established tutorials, user guide, forums. We believe that we were well established for community to be educated, because our background, it's education. We used to be product certified product instructors and all the consultants that teach companies how to do test automation the right way. So my big emphasis as the leader of the company is to educate people and build a credibility on that. So as far as a startup, first of all, look at the technology, look at the personnel that you're going to have. I would highly recommend to have at least one tester that will be focused on test automation, sort of mechanics of all the automation process. Our technology predominantly offers collaboration and engagement of business analyst type or manual tester type personnel that can work with the test automation specialist, with the automator, to provide easy to comprehend artifacts, let's say recording of the manual steps. It's a video recording technology that the automator can watch as a movie and even develop scripts parsing it. Of course, learn about the theory of testing, the aspects of test automation. And it's all available on our website and on YouTube. We intentionally, I have an army of technical writers that build the content and the educational materials for industry to gain the knowledge. Yeah, but today you can do testing and test automation at any budget. Depends how much you need it, but I highly recommend that you'll do that.
Very cool. Well, there you go. There's a free option to get started and learn. Always hard to turn down free. Alex, thanks so much for sharing, kind of your insights on 20 plus years in automation and kind of where APIs are headed.
My pleasure. It. Jason, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you have a question you want to ask, look in the description of whichever platform you're viewing or listening on, and there should be a link there so you can go submit a question, and we'll do our best to find out the right answer for you.